and welcome to the Third Pint Theory. Good day, Martin Bridges. How are you?
I am very good, Michael. How are you?
I'm excellent. I forgot to introduce you as the beer bigwig.
Oh, I'm sure people have worked that out by now.
Hopefully, we may have first-time listeners. For first-time listeners, you're with me, Michael Donaldson, the editor of Pursuit of Hoppiness, and
myself, Martin Bridges. They called me the beer bigwig, as Michael has pointed out.
Yes, and a very happy Warriors fan as well. Very dedicated.
Absolutely. Book the wars.
Yeah, they just keep winning. But we're not going to turn it into a sports podcast. Well, there's enough of those out there, I think.
I think so.
Yeah. Although we can kick off by talking, before we bring our guest in, we're going to talk about competition to an extent, because it was a big Thursday night in Australia. By the time you hear this, it'll be a couple of weeks ago, or a week ago, the Australian International Beer Awards, and like huge, I think, for Altitude Brewing. Again at those awards, second year running, wouldn't say they've dominated it, but they're a massive talking point in that they were the champion small international brewery. They won 2 trophies in the beer styles category for modern pale ale and pilsner. They won 5 gold medals. They did very similar last year, but this year was better, and it was comparable to their New Zealand Beer Awards.
And yeah, I think they're making some damn good beer, and they're nailing the ability to enter it into competition and pull off wins, because it's not just about making good beer, although that really helps. It's kind of picking where to enter it, what to enter, and so on. So I think all power to them. They're running hot at the moment, and going into the awards season now, getting into full swing. You know, we've got the New World Awards not that far away. We've got obviously the Brewers Guild of New Zealand Awards will be July, I think. And then there's the obviously thing. Yep, Smiths, the Malt House, and the Smiths Queenstown IPA challenges. So it's
Stout, the New Zealand Stout Challenge.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So it's
a lot of it.
There's a lot of awards. I think Altitude are well placed for some of that. So
yeah, one of the things that I guess interested me most out of their performance there was that their 2 beers that won trophies were Powder Day Pilsner and their Foggy Goggles Hazy IPA. And they won the Modern Pale Ale Trophy last year with Sleep Dog. So that's 3 trophies with, I would say, probably their 3 top-selling beers. Like, they would have been the most, especially in the tap room there. And I think to win trophies with, I won't say day in, day out beers, but they kind of are. Like, they're not tricked up specialist kind of entries designed to win awards, for instance. So I think that's a really cool part of that.
Winning awards with core range is what you want, really, because then that translates into sales in the bottle shop and the supermarket and whatever, because those are beers that are there all the time. I think if you win with a one-off, it's that old oh heck, we've got to brew it again. Because you've won an award with a beer that's not available. Winning with core range is is great stuff. So I'm really pleased for them. They've done great. And another couple of another interesting one I thought was the uh, Brothers Beer got a couple of nice golds.
Yep, one of the fresh hop,
including the fresh hop that which I think maybe came out a little bit late for our fresh hop roundup the other week. So I hadn't had it by the time we did that episode, but I've had it since the Nectaron Hazy, and it was excellent. And but winning a gold in the fresh hop is
yeah, because and you've got to send it to Australia and hope people look after it and whatever. So yeah, the other brewery, just on that note, that and a few impressed me. Like I don't know if it's the first time Greive have entered. I've got a feeling it is. But they medalled with every one of their beers and got a gold with Terrible Lizards. Rhyme and Reason got 2 gold medals. Again with 2 core range beers there, Mount Alpha IPA and a Black Lips Porter. And there were a host of other, we couldn't run through them all, but there were a host of other good performances. But I think, the New Zealand breweries, I went through the sheet and there weren't many that missed medals, which I think that's pretty cool because it's a big competition. So
yeah, I always find it really interesting who enters. The Australian brewers, because you kind of scan through the list and you go, Gaducci in and enter, but then Behemoth didn't, and you think this is quite odd. Whoever decides, because there's an investment. It is not cheap, particularly for international competitions, getting your beer across there, and you've got a hope that as you say there, it's looked after on the way across and so on. So it's an investment in it, and just deciding whether or not you want to take that risk and take that expense to enter an international competition is interesting. But it's always interesting to see who's entered.
Yeah, I will say that I want to mention, because you say who entered, and so Batch Brewing won the trophy for the best non-alcoholic beer with their all-day hazy. Now that beer, I think it was pretty sure it did really well in the New Zealand Beer Awards. It was top 25 at the New World last year. And you look down the list of who entered that non-alcoholic category, and there were beers there from Brewdog and Sierra Nevada and the Boston Beer Company, all the big ones in Australia that do non-alcs, a whole lot of German and Belgian and Dutch breweries. Like, this was it wasn't just up against Tiny and State of Play, which are a couple of the other ones that were in there from New Zealand that did really well. It was up against some of the best producers in the world. And I've always said the non-alcs that we make here are absolutely outstanding. And I don't think people understand that, but this is proof. Like, I thought that was a really good performance. Yeah.
I thought it was excellent. And it is a great beer. Always has been. I've always enjoyed the batch, the old days. Really great beers. But and I think you're exactly right. I think New Zealand non-alcs have been up there with the best from the beginning of the new wave, shall we say? The Tiny, State of Play, all day.
From the time those kind of more specialist yeasts started to come in and newer technologies, and like especially around hop oils and cryo hops, which lend themselves to non-alcs. And anyway, that's a subject for another day. And Craig Cooper from Batch has promised me that he's coming on to talk to us on the pod. So hopefully we'll get some secrets from him there. Now, the other thing, speaking of competitions, well, tied to this one, Garage Project won the Champion Large International Brewery for the 4th year in a row, which is pretty phenomenal performance. Again, because there are some big, good breweries that enter. And their World Cup gold medal winning Ingolstadt won another gold medal. And our guest today is a man by the name of Howard Greive. Now, many people might not know Howard, and they might say, who and why is he on your podcast? But, and I talk about that beer because I spoke to him on the day that it won that gold medal in the UK, and it gets mentioned in the chat very briefly. So Howard was, he is a shareholder in Garage Project, and for a while there, he was like, his shareholding has whittled down over the years, but for a while there, he was quite a major shareholder in that business and kind of helped it get started. And he's largely sat in the background. He was on the board for a long time. And I've always been fascinated by him and his role with Garage Project. And I just got chatting to him in an email recently and just said, hey, would you come on and do a podcast? And thinking you probably say, oh, no, you know, I'm just one of in the background. But he agreed. And I was kind of racked that he did, because I think this is a really interesting chat, if I say so myself. Not anything to do with me, but all to do with Howard. Because he's so knowledgeable, first of all, in terms of, for people that don't know, if you haven't read the show notes yet, because we'll have it in there, he worked at Saatchi Saatchi, right? So he was in the whole advertising business. He was a copywriter. He was responsible for that very famous ad in New Zealand for Toyota, the bugger ad with the dog, you know, in the back of the ute. Went off and formed his own business with a group of mates, and, you know, had invested. He was in Antipodes Water as a startup, and he'll explain in the thing how he got into Garage Project. But it's just a different look at the brewing industry from someone not making the beer or selling the beer or, you know, judging the beer, you know, not even talking about it like we do, but I guess just sitting there as a player. But, you know,
I think it's a really interesting chat. As you say, it brings that different lens to the Garage Project story. You know, I think there's a real interesting view on the creativity around Garage Project and where that comes from and how that is integral to the business. I thought it is fascinating, and it is really good to just get that different perspective on a really interesting story.
Yeah. And I guess one that's not often told, like, because also for a lot of craft breweries in New Zealand, the people that kind of make the beer tend to run the breweries. There's always sort of backers, but they can often be family and friends and whatever. But this is like, it just comes from a slightly different direction. So I think as you said, it's a really good lens to look at the industry and to look at that particular brewery and what they've achieved and what he thinks they can kind of go on and do. You know, and it's just, he's that little bit removed, I think, from the day-to-day operation to be able to look at it differently. So yeah, it's yeah, I think I enjoyed chatting to him, and I think you'll enjoy, dear listeners, listening to Mr. Greive. Welcome, Howard Greive, to the Third Pint Theory podcast. You're probably not a familiar face to beer lovers, but as we explained in the setup, you're an important part of the New Zealand beer story. But I thought before we talk about Garage Project and your role in that. If you could just, I guess, give the listeners a sense of where you came from. Had you always been in advertising?
I had, Michael. I've always wanted to be in advertising too, and I think that's different from a lot of people that end up in advertising. I think they end up in advertising because they can't make money out of all their other creative endeavors. But I think I love advertising. I still love advertising. I think the combination of creativity and business is just it just suits me down to the ground. I love it.
Yeah.
So,
and I think possibly you're best known. We wouldn't want to pigeonhole you to one thing, but for writing the Toyota ad, the bugger ad that caused such a controversy. Tell us a little bit about that, because I'm curious as to the creative process behind that, and maybe a little bit of the flack that fell from it.
Well, that's so long ago now. It's gosh. So that was co-written with John Plymmer, who's still a shareholder as well of Garage Project.
Yes.
So John and I and another guy called John Fisher, we went away. I've got a place up in the Coromandel. We went away with a whole bunch of briefs, one of which was for the new Hilux. And at that stage, Hilux advertising was legendary. It was Barry Crump and all that sort of stuff. And Saatchi's had won it, so this is our first go at it. So we felt the legacy, the weight of it. It was a bloody funny, so we sort of circled around this thing of we don't quite know how to land on an ad for the new Hilux. But we did find, the one thing we found is a really good single mind proposition had a more powerful engine. And so we started to toss around that. And for some reason, John Fisher kept on saying, it'd be really funny if this Hilux pulled a cow's head off. To which we said, oh, fuck, you're joking. That's, can't think of anything worse, frankly. Anyway, so we kept on batting things around. He kept on coming back to this idea of a cow's head being pulled off. And anyway, he said, look, the only way you could play that is if you intimated that the cow's head had been pulled off and it got undercut with just a simple word from the farmer, just sort of going bugger. And then we just wrote a whole bunch of crazy scenarios and
oh, classic. Yeah.
Yeah. Very simple.
Yeah. And but at the time, I mean, it got a lot of backlash, didn't it? It was
oh, it was huge. There's a massive risk that the thing would last one night on air and then get whipped off.
yeah.
Honestly, it really was. And huge credit to Kim Wexford, who was the account executive, who realised this and had sort of calmed Toyota down, who, to their credit as well, said, yeah, let's make this thing. But Kim recognised that this thing could just be a one-hit wonder, over in a night, which would be, then we'd be talking about one of the greatest disasters in New Zealand advertising.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he quietly got around basically all of the people on the Advertising Standards Authority, just quietly sort of worked them, just sort of said, look, it's not really that much of a bad word and all that sort of stuff. And the first thing that's going to happen, which always happens in these situations, is you always get the negative feedback first, and then you get a wave of people loving it. But they're the ones they don't write in and go, I love it. It's always the negative people that come in. And so Kim had just done a fantastic job of actually sort of calming Advertising Standards Authority, knowing that a tsunami of hate would come through, but then afterwards it would be fine. And so it proved.
Yeah, yeah. You were at Saatchi Saatchi at that point, but you went off and set up your own business in the early 2000s, I'm thinking. That'd be right.
Yeah. Yes, there was 4 of us, all worked at Saatchi's, Peter Cullinane, James Hall, Kim Thorpe, and myself. And we recognised that actually we tried to make a lot of fundamental changes to Saatchi's, even though it was a wildly successful agency in its time, but it was sort of stuck in a mold of being a part of a multinational agency. Very hard to change cultures and change the whole way that business would work. And we tried it several times and it never came off. So we said, well, why don't we just start our own? And
Okay. Yeah.
that's how it came about. So we started Assignment, and we created a whole new business model, which was just 4 senior people working on the business. Nobody else, no PAs, no assistants whatsoever. We booked our own meetings, we booked our own airfares, we did everything, and it was a really good model. It really worked. It was great.
Mm.
And within 2 years, we'd sold it to a big Australian public listed company who were really intrigued by the model until they realised we're all getting old and we're going to have these 4 senior people.
Yeah. Was it around that time that you were involved in Antipodes Water as a startup business?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. It was before Assignment had really started. It had sort of started. Kim Thorpe and Peter Cullinane had started it by themselves, but it was in baby steps at the time. It wasn't really. It needed to sort of grow, and so James and I came on board. But we were very intrigued back then. Like advertising, as I said, I love it, and I think we all loved it. But we were interested in having our own business as well. So we went away, Peter Cullinane, myself, and Simon Woolley, the late Simon Woolley, went away to Peter's place for a day just to see what business could we start. And we faffed around all day. And then Simon had just recently come back from New York. And New Zealand was just going through one of those amazing phases when it's really feeling its oats. We'd won the America's Cup. We were about to host the America's Cup. Tourism New Zealand had just done this huge campaign, 100% pure New Zealand. Like it was really emerging. And Simon came back, and he used to be in hospitality. He had the wonderful restaurant you may remember, Metropole.
Yes.
Simon's. Anyway, I came back from New York and he said, I can't believe this place sells itself as 100% pure New Zealand. Everywhere I go, all these restaurants, I see Perrier and I see, Evian and I see San Pellegrino, but I don't see New Zealand water. I said, why don't we start a New Zealand water? We said, with that simple little observation, we decided to do that.
Yeah.
And I could go on, for ages about how we had to position that against those big multinationals in order for it to succeed and make money. It was a really interesting exercise. It still remains to be a really interesting exercise. It's a fantastic company and brand, which I'm enormously proud of.
Yeah. I mean, we'll come back and maybe contrast that with Garage Project a little bit later. We'd probably get ahead of ourselves if we talk about that now, because I think probably more importantly is, okay, so you've had this background, you've started this business. How did you end up getting involved in beer and more precisely with Garage Project? Like, were you looking for something to do with beer? Was it just Wellington at the time? Did you know the guys? What was the story there?
It was pretty simple, Michael. What happened was, and I've got to say, I knew nothing about craft beer. I hadn't even heard of it at this stage, even though Wellington was sort of like the hub of it. But it just wasn't on my radar. But what was on my radar, I was doing some work as a sort of an advisor to Film New Zealand, not the New Zealand Film Commission, but Film New Zealand, which was sort of like a private body, which was sort of designed to, or came together to try and attract overseas movies to be made in New Zealand and sort of bolster the industry. And they had just appointed Joss, I think, onto the board. I think he was on the board. Joss will be able to confirm this. Anyway, I went along. We did a session, and then I caught up with Joss. And I was really intrigued by this young guy, and he had just he was working as marketing guy at She Interactive, a really good interactive company in Wellington, of which I knew nothing about. And so I was sort of curious about this. So I said, can I come down and show me around? So he showed me what they were doing there and all that sort of stuff. I thought it was fascinating. I thought he was really fascinating. So we sort of stayed in touch and thought nothing more about it. He was doing that, and I was, running assignment in Wellington with the crew there. And then he turned up one day. He said, "Want to have a meeting?" And he turned up with Pete Gillespie, who had just come in from Australia. And he said, "There's Pete, and we're thinking of starting a craft brewery." And I went, "Okay, radio, interesting." Trying to pretend I knew what the craft brewery and all that sort of stuff was. And I think, I can't quite remember how it went, but, they were two bright guys, on a mission. And we talked about, I think they'd come up with some names and all that sort of stuff. And I think the only thing I said to them is, the only thing that strikes me is if it's a craft of any description, then it's got to have some real authenticity to it. Like to have a name that sort of means nothing, it's just harder, you need to everything needs to sort of build together. Anyway, about 2 weeks later, Michael, they came back and they said, "Yeah, we thought about that. Okay, this is what we're going to do. We've got ourselves a 50-litre kit, and we've taken a lease. We've got a 50-litre kit. We're going to brew a different beer every week for 24 weeks on this kit. We're going to drop it at Saatchi Saatchi, the local craft beer bar that you'd know. We're taking the lease on an old garage, petrol station up in Arrow Street, and we're going to call ourselves Garage Project." And I thought, fuck, that is the best new business pitch I think I've ever heard. It's everything married up. Do you know what I mean? Highly experimental, just bootstrapping it. Brilliant. And that's basically how it all started.
Yeah. So you, without knowing really anything about craft beer, hardly...
And really, I still don't, Michael, to tell you the truth.
But I guess in terms of an early investment, there probably wasn't a lot because it was pretty small scale at that point.
Yeah, it was. I think this is one of the interesting observations of the craft beer industry, Michael, is that the cost of entry is so low that anyone can do it. It's a bit of dumb stainless steel and some gas, and off you go. And then, so that's why you just end up with people always opening up breweries. The problem comes that the cost of sort of taking that little baby and taking it into a proper grown-up industry is unbelievably expensive. If you want to do it properly, it's really bloody expensive. And I think my observation is a lot of craft breweries in New Zealand don't appreciate how hard it is to get that momentum, to get yourself out of that little trap from small to large. Anyway, what was that? I've wandered off subject there.
Oh, no. I mean, I'm thinking also about like other investors who came with you in those early days. And given your background, a lot of, you already talked about Joss being a very clever guy. Pete's just an outstanding brewer, an incredibly smart person as well. Like they had a talent, but you're also bringing, I guess, creative force to the business. Did you, and I guess your colleagues, have any input into it in the early days, or were you more sort of silent in the business? Like, I can imagine it would have been hard to sit on your hands.
Well, actually, the thing, there's two points of that. We were very sort of hands-on because it was basically sweat equity. In effect, right at the very beginning, we put a nominal value on the company and sort of the shareholder distribution. And, in there was Patrick Hussey, really great accountant. Matt Bale, really good media guy, probably the smartest media planner in New Zealand. But I would say he is. Still chair of Garage Project.
Okay.
John Plymmer, great copywriter. Myself. Gary, who owned the Cross, Southern Cross pub.
Yeah.
Really good. Like a good solid pair of hands or arms to wrap around these two guys as they started. The second part of it was we recognised pretty bloody early on that they didn't need any creativity. What they needed more than anything else was a bit of a bridle around their unconstrained bloody creativity. And to this point, Pete started writing the copy on the labels and a lot of stuff. And this gets back to the idea of authenticity and craft and all that sort of stuff. And I said, look, you just write like an angel, Pete. Just you write. You don't need Plym. You don't need me. You just write. You're a great writer. You just keep. Mm. And to this day, we've never had to do anything. John came up with the great line, "Try something new," which really sort of summed the brand up at that point, and still does. But the rest of it's just those guys. They were off and running.
Yeah. I mean, Pete's got that background. What did he study? He studied journalism, I think.
Well, a lot of people don't know this, but he's got a PhD in philosophy.
That's right. Yeah.
But he always wanted to be a brewer. But there's this real deepness within Pete, which I think you can always tether it back to this PhD in philosophy. Like, he does think very deeply about stuff and the culture of the place and all that sort of stuff. Wonderful.
Yeah. And that was reflected in, the book they released a few years ago, where they sort of pulled together all the writing and the imagery that had gone into the business at that point. And then and he did that as well, like brought all that together and wrote it. And, everything. One of the things about Garage Project is that everything they do is sort of beautiful. It's and I don't know. What's your take on how they manage to keep being so creative after all these years, like coming up 15 years, to still be really creative, to present really beautifully, to remain kind of understated, and yet to be, probably the dominant craft brewery in the country in terms of productivity, influence, ideas, etc. Like, when you got involved, did you see it getting to this? First of all, like, could you have imagined that? And sort of second part of that is how have they managed to do it and do it in such a, I still think it's understated and restrained. Like, they're sort of, it's a weird complexity for me.
Yeah. I think from my point of view, Michael, and we were just discussing this with the guys recently, just talking about the brand and so forth, is that the way we look at it is Garage Project isn't just a brewery, it's a creative studio that happens to work in beer. It's a different flip, as its medium, like beer is its medium, but it's a creative place. It's always coming up with new beers, new names, the way you put on an event. It's much easier to think of it as a creative studio that just happens to use beer as its medium, as opposed to a brewery that then becomes a lot more playful than a brewery. I was saying to them, I think the three key creative elements are the sort of workflow within the place. Is that it's, there's a lot of playfulness. You sort of see it in the names and the labels and all that. So there's a lot of joy. You can sort of feel the fun of it, but also a relentlessness, which and I think that's where that relentlessness is actually the key motivator of it. They never settle. And, the bugger it is with those guys is, if you just said, okay, let's just stop. Let's stop and stop spending money on new beers and let's just start concentrating on, a core range like everybody else does, pernicious weed, and you've got, beer or, what, let's have you could never do it with those guys. It's absolutely impossible. It won't happen. So the thing is to try and fashion a business around that relentless spirit. And that's a trick.
Okay. Yeah. That's a really good take. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you think about other breweries at the moment, and right now they're struggling because effectively they are just breweries and they have nothing else to offer to a large degree. Yeah. And I think that when you think of it as a creative studio that uses beer as its medium, it's a far more fun thing. It's always throwing something up that people can try or dismiss, whatever, but you can't ignore them.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, this, in some ways, we could just flip back quickly to Antipodes, which is, I guess, the opposite, because it's one thing stripped back,
Yeah. It's I can't remember how many beers Pete and Joss have put out by now, but we're into the hundreds, obviously.
Oh, it's close to 1,000. I'm waiting for the day on Untapped when it ticks over to 1,000. It'll be in 900 and something, I think. Yeah.
Unreal. Okay, so that's it. Antipodes has only had 4 SKUs, single sales,
Yeah.
But that's, you can have a sparkling or a still, 1 litre or 500. That's it. That's a very efficient business model. My God. It's just like, it's chalk and cheese, but they have very similar other similarities in that it's always about positioning. Do you know what I mean? Garage Pro can't and is impossible to position it other than sort of this relentless, playful thing. But it is still a premium craft beer in among all these others. Same with Antipodes, is a premium water.
Yeah,
and positioning those things is really tricky. It's about price. When you haven't got the normal things, your advertising budgets and all that sort of stuff. It's where you're seen, who's drinking it, all your distribution points, and everything sort of adds up to a brand perception. And you've got to keep those levers playing all the time.
It's interesting when this question I have further down my list, but I think it's a good time to talk to it. In terms of advertising, like big breweries in the past, it was really important to be on television, in newspapers, to be always seen on big billboards. Craft beer, not many of them have ever had the budget to go down that route, and it's not necessarily where they were going to find their people either.
Yeah.
But yet, Garage Project has ended up on the field in a Super Rugby game. I'm interested in that.
I mean, that makes no sense, does it? You sort of think about it, but in a lot of ways, I think it just came about as part, and I don't know, the guys can talk about that because I'm now not on the board, so I'm slightly removed from these things, but I think it came about from the stadium, the Sky Stadium pouring rights thing. It might have been, what else, or what about the signage on the, chuck that in. And of course, a lot of people go, what are they doing for that? And who cares? It's just like, okay, it's the signs on the field. There's a bit more awareness. There'll be a whole bunch of people in New Zealand going, what the fuck's that thing on what is that Garage Project thing on the field? They're not used to seeing anything like that. I love that. I love that sort of this, well, so what?
Yeah.
Stick it on.
Yeah, but it also, it almost fits to an extent in that.
Doesn't
they're disruptors, not deliberately disruptive, but disruptive by just the way things are done. And they did there were beers, Garage Project beers in the stadium. Going back, I think maybe for Phoenix matches. I'm trying to remember.
Deal for the Phoenix ages ago.
Yeah.
We know right from the get go, we've always done little deals, just to help to really sort of. No one's going to go looking for you. You've actually got to really go and force. Quite often, you just got to force the beer onto people for them to try. And the stadium, I think, is a really good example of actually, if you just think about it, it's just trialing. It's just getting people to trial Garage Project.
Yeah.
Where they normally wouldn't. Those people wouldn't normally go to a craft beer bar or whatever and have Garage Project. They'll go along to the Phoenix, they go along to the Hurricanes or whoever, and there's, 4 or 5 beers from Garage Project, and there you go. You've got some more converts out of it. So I really like it. I think I was reflecting on this with Burger Wellington, which we sponsored which is just like one of those sort of crazy. This is a classic sort of Garage Project thing. That I was on the board of PWT, Positive Wellington Tourism, and Sarah Meikle, Sarah's marketing manager, and they were. And I think this is a fantastic thing that they were doing, is they were slowly building up this Wellington on a plate sidebar, within Policy of Wellington Tourism. And then it got released, and Sarah took it over, and it became a big thing. Part of that was Burger Wellington, and Sarah said to me, "Oh, it's a real bugger." She said, "I've lost my beer sponsor." I lost a sponsor. I've lost a sponsor for Burger Wellington. It was some Infometrics or one of those sort of people.
Yeah.
And I said, "Oh, yeah, burgers, beer. Okay, right. Yeah. Well, what about, how much do you need?" She said, "Oh, I need, can't remember what it was, $7,000 or something like that." This is a really interesting story, Michael, and just how it forces change.
Yeah.
I said, okay, well, look, we can't afford that. We can't afford 7. Why don't I give you 5, give you 5,000 this year. We'll do a 3-year deal, and then we'll do 7,000 in the mid-year and 9,000 in the out year, thinking that we can actually grow the whole thing over 3 years. We can probably all that sort of stuff. So, she said, okay, and literally it was just done on the back of a fag pack, and spoke to Joss and Pete about it. Yeah, okay, right. And then, of course, Joss and Pete, those days were only in bottles, those rather large bottles. I can't remember what it was, 650 ml or something like that. Those, those bigger bottles, which are not good for, if we're going to distribute, we're going to be in all the restaurants and cafes and burger joints around Wellington. It's not the right thing. So, hey ho, before you know it, in comes a little canning machine, and that's how Garage Project got into cans. And so there's another opportunity. How so for the. I can always remember myself, my kids, Joss, Pete, we're all in there bloody with a sort of basically almost like a manual canning machine.
Yeah.
Yeah, beer spraying bloody everywhere. It was a complete catastrophe. We managed to get it out there. But it's another example of actually just doing something. And then out of that comes a whole new thing. And of course, we were very early. In fact, I think we were the only ones, the first ones into cans. And it really forced another appraisal of the brand, just simply by these opening up to these opportunities.
Yeah. It's interesting because other craft breweries had dabbled in cans. Sawmill had done them, I think. Brew Moon down in North Canterbury might have been another one, but nobody kind of put them on the map like Garage Project did. And I mean, I didn't know that story, that Burger Wellington story of the, as a catalyst for that. But again, the cans they're so much better than bottles for showcasing the art. And
that was the full can, not just one little label.
Yeah. And I think that in itself changed the direction of beer in New Zealand because, and it became a point where people go, oh my God, you can't look at a supermarket shelf now because it's all just razzle dazzle. But it's because people saw what Garage Project could do in that space, I believe. I think they were that step ahead and kind of led that direction.
I think you did right, Michael. And I think part of the problem that Garage Project's always going to have is it's like a pathfinder. It's showing the industry where to go. And so suddenly all these wacky designs came out on cans, and then you get that supermarket shelf just like, I've no idea. This becomes an issue because there's no one actually doing anything different, apart from I really like Sawmill because they're just keeping it very plain and simple and you recognise it immediately. And, it's, whereas, I don't know, there's just a gazillion bloody breweries out there all sort of doing the same stuff.
On that note, on a personal level, in terms of beer, you said you didn't know about craft beer before you got involved with Garage Project. Are you now, would you call yourself an aficionado, an expert? Like, what's your beer journey been like?
Well, boy, if I had to give you my top 5 beers,
yes,
outside of Belgium, because I think unreal. In New Zealand, they'd all be Garage Project, but they would be the ones that I keep on insisting that bloody Joss and Pete should bring back, but they never bloody do. Umami, what was that?
Umami Monster.
Umami Monster, amazing beer, amazing beer. Red Rocks Reserve, brilliant, brilliantly conceived, brilliant beer. These ones that have got this real. They've got a real story. You can see where Pete's really thought about it. Mutiny on the Bounty.
Yep.
Great, once again, a really great story about, that came about because, remember that little craft beer festival in Wellington called the South Pacific?
Yes.
Remember that?
Yeah. That Dominic organised from Hashigasaki, yeah.
Oh, did he? Is that how they came about? Okay.
I'm pretty sure he did, then.
So, as I remember it, once again, Pete goes way over the fucking top for this tiny little festival.
Yeah.
And he gets, goes, South Pacific, right. The Bounty. Yes, okay. What did the Bounty have on it? Oh, that's right. So he finds a list of all the ingredients that the Bounty had on it. Of course, it was English, so it'll be a stout or a porter or whatever, And he makes this unbelievable beer, and then it's branded up beautifully, all for this little thing. And it's just like, oh my god, these I think Pernicious Weed's an outstanding beer. That's about it. I'm an absolute advocate of all the Wild Workshop stuff, and I'm an advocate of Wild Workshop simply because I think it is another key point of difference.
Yeah.
Of course, it's not going to make a lot of money. It's a limited volume that's sitting in barrels and kegs for years and been back blended and all that sort of stuff. But outstanding beer, and you will probably hear by the time this goes out, there's another outstanding result.
Yes.
Oh, you know about it. Okay.
I know about it. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's.
So we can talk about that. That's another gold medal at the World Beer Cup. For Angel's Piss.
Yeah, which I actually had neatly. Gabriel and I had that on Sunday night. Beautiful beer. Yeah. Beautiful. I think. A lot of the stuff coming out of there now is outstanding. It really is. Yeah. And I think there was a silver for something else as well, wasn't there?
Chance like a Magic 2020 again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it. See, that's just going to get better and better, obviously, as they can just master the back blending, and it'll be just an interesting beer all the way from here on in, I reckon.
Yeah. Look, I mean, you talk about, a love of Belgian beers, and I just think what Wild Workshop allows them to do as best you can is replicate something that you might find in Belgium in a city Wellington. It's I was tempted to the words movie set came into my head. It's an effect.
I know exactly you're going with it. Yeah. That's dead right. Almost a facade of the Belgian thing.
The interesting thing about Garage Project in that sense is that they're eclectic, they're international. They won, we're talking about winning medals at the World Beer Cup. They won another bronze medal in the Belgian beer event last year, but yet they are very much still and strongly a Wellington brewery, like very connected to Wellington, and have invested now quite heavily in the city. And I just wondered about your thoughts on, I guess it speaks to provenance to an extent, like to be so firmly connected to a place, in terms of, it's the 3 venues now, or 4 really, because you can say there's 2 in Arrow Street, Leeds Street, the Wild Workshop with the Oriental Bay thing that comes to. As a Wellingtonian, what do you make of that in terms of, I guess, their legacy, first of all, and their importance to the city, and the city's importance to Garage Project, I guess?
I think it's a really interesting question, Michael, because I hadn't really thought about it in that way, because you're just sort of thinking about the brand and what it's doing and all that sort of stuff. But it certainly feeds into the narrative, the city narrative of a creative city. It's a living, shining example of a creative city. And you do hear people sort of say, like any number of Weta Workshop, and then you've got Garage Project, and you've got, there's a number of things. They just use them as exemplars of a creative city. Yeah. And I think that's really good. It was certainly not by design, but we did agonise very early on about keeping Arrow Street on the logo and the label to a large degree. And I really like it because it's sort of quirky. Like, I kind of liked if someone back in the early days, we were shipping Red Rock Reserves up to Norway, I think it was. And, someone up there going Garage Project Arrow Street, and we're just like, what the hell? But there's there's a great old thing in advertising, Michael, which is where there's mystery, there's margin.
That's nice.
Yeah. And so like Arrow Street is like, what, outside of Wellington's like, what the fuck is that? It's mystery. No. Garage Project Arrow Street just feeds the mystery.
Yeah. Look, you just reminded me a little bit back in the early days of craft beer, when everyone was on Twitter, and that was a great place for seeding kind of mystery. And there was a lot of stuff that happened in that space that felt kind of a little bit teasy, like this is what might be coming, and yeah. So I know what you mean, and it creates that sense of need and want, desire, this product that you don't even really know too much about. How it exists, and and you're pretty sure it'll be good, and but
yeah.
I mean, that's the other thing.
This is the problem, I think, of breweries in particular with a core range, is you can't do that. You're just chucking it down the line. As an aside, I think Lion have done a brilliant job to riding their way through the craft beer thing. I think they fundamentally recognise they weren't a brewery at all. They were a sales and distribution company.
Yeah.
And they sell beer and they sell coffee and they sell, water. They sell bloody whatever down that.
Well, I think still, but
yeah. But that's, and I think back on that point of when you can't tease something when you've just got a core range, because it's just the core range. You just got to somehow use advertising, which is a very expensive way to sort of keep things desired. Preference, desire up there. Very expensive. Much better just like do it through product. I mean, do it through product rather than advertising. Always going to be on a winner.
Yeah. On that note, I guess what's the future? Like the brewery this year turns 15 years old. Having been on that journey with it the whole time, like, are you able to come up with like what is even the next 5 to 10 years look like, and possibly further? Like, what is the Garage Project story? How do you see it going?
I think it will. I don't think there are certainly plans for expansion. I'm not on the board anymore, so I'm 2 steps removed. But I know there's a new set of really good investors and shareholders who have come in, and I think this is the thing also, that this idea of, we're talking about the need for capital. These things are really capital intensive. A craft brewer who wants to really get going properly, employ 50, 60, 70 people, it's capital intensive. So it needs new shareholding, new ideas, new energy, and I think that's a really important part. And I think that in a lot of ways you have to recognise that as a shareholder to a large degree as well. And I think also that a lot of craft breweries don't. They just sort of sit there with their shareholding, but they're not prepared to give away shareholding to introduce more capital, more energy, more momentum into the business. And that could almost be a New Zealand thing as well.
Yeah.
It's better to be a smaller part of a massive thing than a big part of a small thing, because, my God, when you're small, it's just hard to get momentum. It's just really hard. You're always just getting consumed by any number of things. It's just a problem.
Do you, I don't know, do you see a point where they become, and it's been talked about to an extent, like, because I think there was a look at setting up a brewery in Australia.
Yeah.
But could they become a global kind of company? You could say they're a global brand, probably now, like recognized globally, but in terms of a business, is there an opportunity to take what's been created here and extend it?
Yeah, definitely. It would have to be different. It would be, and it could be built around a product range. I think Tiny's got the chance to go completely global.
Yeah,
ride the wellness revolution. No, definitely. Yeah, I think that's probably going to be the next layer for Garage Project, is actually taking these opportunities globally, very strategically, very cleverly. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I do see it. And so, still holding on back to that idea of holding on to Wellington as a base, as a passionate foundation of the whole thing. But yeah, definitely, I can see that.
You've probably answered this question, but and I'm conscious of time. But is there like a secret source for Garage Project, like that you could nail in a very short brief that sets them apart?
I get back to that thing I was saying, that I think it isn't a brewery. I think it's a creative place that uses beer as its medium. And then you layer on that the two distinct talents and personalities of Joss and Pete into that, and let them play. That's the secret sauce. I mean, there's nothing more than that. That's it. It's been great to sit back and watch it, frankly.
Yeah, and to have such a close seat for so much of it.
Yeah, and they're still, I'm still really good friends with them. It's been a great ride.
Yeah. And on a personal note, and we might just finish it here. You have sort of whittled down your shareholding. You point that you're no longer on the board. Are you gradually sort of stepping back from that business? Are you more an interested bystander now, or do you still have you still have what, 9% or something of the business. I think you've got a stake.
I've got a stake. Yeah, that's right. I've got an absolute interest in the business because I'm a shareholder in the business, of course. But for the longest time there, Michael, I was also the chair, and there's during all those times, and then trying to build it, trying to get it from a craft business into a business.
Mm.
They're two distinct things. A business is when you and all that sort of stuff, and then all the personalities that are involved in that takes a lot of time. And so I think I'm more than happy with my shareholding, and I'm more than happy to step back and let a whole new board sit in there and help Joss and Pete take it into the future, for sure.
Yeah. It's been a memorable journey, and you played such an integral part in it. And I think that a lot of people, hopefully, they can just say thank you to their audio or video screen. But yeah, no, as someone who met you sort of on a couple of occasions briefly in the early days, I've always been sort of fascinated with what you've done and your contribution to it. So I really appreciate you joining us to talk about it. It's been brilliant. Thank you.
Oh, it's been great. Thank you, Michael. Really good.
Wow.
How about that? That was fascinating. It was just really interesting. And it's resolved something that has always nagged at the back of my head, and I've never been able to figure it out, was that when Garage Project started off, I had heard this rumor that Saatchi and Saatchi were involved in Garage Project somehow. And it was like, but they're not. And where did that noise come from? And finally, when you had this conversation with Howard, it becomes clear he used to work for Saatchi and Saatchi, and he had money in Garage Project. So that's finally the connection has landed in my head.
Yeah. And I know that Howard's come in at this as a creative, as a copywriter, as a person who works in that field. But I thought his description of Garage Project as a creative studio that just sort of happens to work in the medium of beer is it's like that actually nails so much about what they do, because they're so hard to define in many ways,
Absolutely. They are so hard to pin down in terms of, there's the relentless creativity in terms of new beers, artwork, etc. But then there's that kind of relentless delivery of core range and so on, and then there's the innovation around Tiny and the Wild Workshop and so on. So yeah, it is. I think that creative studio that happens to work in beer is the perfect summing up.
Very good analogy or description. And I did. I sort of teased out of him, I think, a little bit at the end about sort of how much bigger can Garage Project get, and kind of I was a bit surprised that kind of that could be a kind of global brand answer. And you think, well, actually, kind of why not? Like New Zealand has plenty of global brands that you may not have expected to become global brands for whatever reason. And the one that just immediately popped into my head was Rocket Lab. This crazy business that started in New Zealand and is now, like, I don't know, running things for the US military or whatever they're doing. But, it's being in New Zealand doesn't stop you from going to the world and making a success of yourself, whether that eventuates in our lifetimes or not. I'm not sure, but it's the thinking behind it, I think, is quite amazing. That it's why not?
Yeah, and I think that is it's kind of the last couple of years have kind of been really tough economically for all. And I know that Garage Project certainly did look at a brewery in Australia,
yes,
as an option. And then the last couple of years, I think everybody has kind of pulled back a bit. But I know that Garage Project have just sent their first container load of beer to the UK. So I wonder whether they are starting to look at those international markets again, whether that would be possible for them to grow. The interesting point I took from Howard's answer around that was that he saw that Tiny was a spearhead for that in terms of the non-alc market is growing so much, and they have the research and development that they've put into that gives them a bit of an edge.
Yeah, like again, going back to our conversation at the front end of this around the batch all day non-alc meant so good. Tiny got a silver in that event in Australia, but it's always in the medals, and it's a really good beer. I had a couple last week. There's always a 6-pack in our fridge because my wife loves it, and I was just like, it's really good. It's just a really good beer, and I just feel like we live in lucky times that you can decide I'm not going to have a beer tonight, but I can have a beer still. If you know what I mean. It tastes so hoppy and fresh, and just it's fantastic, and it's great branding, looks great, so why not?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, there was
a world with non-alcoholic beer, isn't there?
Yeah. They I saw that whole thing about George Clooney's non-alc brand, and getting funding or seed money to the tune of $150 million, and all you need is someone like that to sit in front of it, find the right superstar to hook up with, because that seems to be the main vehicle now for alcohol brands, is to have some sort of movie star or something to drive it into public consciousness. And
so Tom Holland, the Spider-Man guy, he's got a knockout brand as well, doesn't he?
Yes. And there's another actor, it's on the tip of my tongue, but there's so many different I guess celebrities now behind brands, but especially in that non-alc space. Really interesting development in that area. Martin, we will be back again in a couple of weeks. And I think next up, we're talking to Greg McGill. Is that
we are? Well, I have to.
Greg McGill, long-standing beer stalwart in New Zealand, behind the bureaucracy. I can never say that word. Bureaucracy brand.
Yeah. From Hamilton, the city of the future.
Yes. Yeah. Not tied up with red tape. Yeah.
I went down there and we had a great old chat about various things, including bureaucracy and beer judging at a global scale, and because Greg has judged at World Beer Cup and Great American Beer Festival and some the biggest competitions in the world. So So yes, there's some really interesting. It was a good chat. We've got some good nuggets. In there, and a few other interesting episodes coming up too. We've got a pipeline of content. I think
don't go anywhere. Stay with us for all your beer news. The Third Pint Theory is recorded, edited, and produced by myself, Michael Donaldson, and Martin Bridges, the Beer Bigwig. You can find past episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and all the other podcast platforms.
If you've enjoyed this episode, remember to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And please leave us a comment or rating. It really helps other beer lovers find the show. You can also find us on socials. We're third.pint.theory on Instagram and at thirdpinttheory.bsky.social on Blue Sky.
Don't forget to check out what we're up to outside the podcast. You can read my latest articles, reviews, and news in the Pursuit of Hoppiness magazine at hoppiness.co.nz. Plus, you can sign up to my weekly beer news email, Friday Night Beers, at hoppiness.substack.com.
And if you're a brewery, bar, or restaurant owner looking for help with making the most out of craft beer, you can get in touch with me at martin.bridges@beerbigwig.com. I can help you with beer lists, events, tastings, or other ways to help you make better beer decisions.
Finally, if you're interested in sponsoring the podcast or advertising, or you had any other suggestions or questions, drop me an email at michael@hoppiness.co.nz.
Until next time, keep your glass full and your hops fresh. Ka kite anō.